Hello, my friend. It is wonderful to have you here. Have you ever wondered why some people never seem to feel pressure? Not because they are stronger than everyone else, not because they are braver than everyone else, but because life, in its own strange way, never gave them the chance to learn how to be afraid. Tonight, our story begins in a working-class neighborhood on the edge of Barcelona, in a home where money was tight and space was tighter. A teenage mother, a father working whatever jobs he could find, and a small boy who spent his afternoons kicking a ball between parked cars because there was nowhere else to play. Nobody in that neighborhood could have promised you what came next. At 15, that boy pulled on a Barcelona shirt and broke a record that had stood for over 100 years. At 16, he carried Spain onto the biggest stage in European football. At 17, one day after blowing out his own birthday candles, he lifted a trophy in front of the entire world. They started calling him the next Lionel Messi. And yet, through every bit of noise, every expectation, every ounce of pressure that would break most grown men, somehow he just kept playing the same way he always had. This is the story of Lamine Yamal. To really understand Lamine Yamal, you have to go back before he was even born, to two young people who came from entirely different corners of the world and somehow ended up in the same small pocket of Spain. His father, Munir Nasraoui, was born in Larache, a coastal city in northern Morocco. He was still a small child when his own mother, Fatima, made the kind of decision that quietly shapes an entire family's future. She left Morocco alone, without her husband, without all of her children at once. Her plan was simple to say and brutal to actually carry out. Get to Spain first, work every job she could get her hands on, save every coin, and then bring the rest of the family over, one at a time. According to Yamal himself, speaking years later on a Spanish podcast, his grandmother worked mornings, afternoons, and nights, whatever shifts she could find, until she had saved enough to bring her husband and children across. Munir arrived in Spain at around 3 years old, raised largely by Fatima in a neighborhood called Rocafonda, in the coastal town of Mataró. On the other side of this story is Lamine's mother, Sheila Ibana, whose roots trace back to Bata in Equatorial Guinea, a small country on the west coast of Central Africa. Like Munir's family, Sheila's side of the family made their own journey to Spain in search of something better, eventually settling in the Barcelona area as well. Sheila and Munir met as very young people. Sheila was working as a waitress. Munir was taking whatever labor he could find, construction sites, painting buildings, anything that paid. And by the time Lamine was born, on July 13, 2007, in Esplugues de Llobregat, just outside Barcelona, Sheila was only 16 years old. Let that sit with you for a moment, because it matters for everything that follows. Lamine Yamal's mother gave birth to him as a teenager herself, inside a family that already had 2 generations of migration, hardship, and hustle behind it. Munir and Sheila's relationship did not last. They separated when Lamine was around 3 years old. But, and this becomes one of the most consistent threads in his entire story, both parents stayed present in his life. Neither one disappeared. Munir kept showing up. Sheila kept working, kept pushing, kept believing in her son, eventually moving to the nearby town of Granollers, while Munir remained in Mataró, with young Lamine splitting his time between both of them. For a stretch of his early childhood, the family lived in conditions Yamal has since described in blunt, unglamorous terms. A home where the kitchen and the sleeping space were essentially one and the same room. Not a poetic exaggeration for a sympathetic headline, an actual description he has given in his own words of where he grew up. Here is a detail about Lamine Yamal that a lot of casual fans never learn, and it might be the most touching part of his entire story. Lamine Yamal is not actually a family name. According to multiple Spanish media reports, before Lamine was born, his parents were struggling badly to make rent. Two men whose names happened to be Lamine and Yamal stepped in and helped the young family through that difficult stretch. In gratitude, Munir reportedly made a quiet promise. If he ever had a son, that son would carry both of those names forward. That promise became real the day his son was born. His full legal name is Lamine Yamal Nasraoui Ebana. Nasraoui from his father's side, Ebana from his mother's. But the two first names, the ones now chanted in stadiums across the world, belong to two men most of the football world will never know anything else about. In Arabic, Lamine is connected to the word for honesty and trustworthiness. Yamal is a variation of Jamal, meaning grace or beauty. Whether by coincidence or quiet design, those meanings ended up describing the player and the person he grew into rather well. On the back of his shirt, for both Barcelona and Spain, he doesn't wear his family surname. He wears Lamine Yamal, a small permanent tribute to two strangers who once helped his family survive a hard season of their lives. Rocafonda is not a postcard version of Spain. It is a dense, working-class neighborhood in Mataró, home to families from Morocco, Senegal, Latin America, and dozens of other backgrounds. The kind of place where, in a lot of households, making rent some months was a genuine question mark. It is also a place where football is everywhere. Concrete courts, tight alleyways, older, bigger kids playing rough. And in the middle of it all, a small, skinny boy who kept showing up anyway, first with a local club called CF La Torreta, the kind of grassroots team where talent gets discovered by word of mouth rather than a scouting department. Yamal has spoken about this part of his life with a bluntness that stands out. He has described his early childhood plainly, a home where space was tight and money was tighter, where his mother worked long hours to hold things together while his father searched for whatever income he could find. But he has also made a point of saying that Rocafonda was not only hardship. It was also where he learned to play without fear, because on those courts, hesitation got you nothing. You either played through the pressure or you didn't get to play at all. Running through it all was his grandmother, Fatima, one of the steadiest presences in his life. She raised him partly in a home rooted in strong Islamic tradition and taught him a personal prayer that he still recites before matches to this day. Everything that happened to Yamal afterward, every record, every headline, every trophy, happened to a kid who never actually left Rocafonda behind, at least not emotionally. He still returns to visit family there, and he carries the neighborhood with him literally. Its postal code, 304, is stitched into his story and performed as a hand gesture after almost every goal he scores, a quiet tribute to the streets that raised him, done in front of tens of millions of people. Here's a detail that sounds almost too perfect to be true, except it's real and it's well documented. In the fall of 2007, a Barcelona newspaper organized a charity calendar with UNICEF, raffling off the chance for local families to have their photo taken at Camp Nou with a Barça player. A family from Rocafonda entered and won. The baby they brought along was a few months old. The player who ended up cradling and bathing him for the photos was a 20-year-old. Just beginning his own rise at the club, Lionel Messi. That baby was Lamine Yamal. For years, that photograph mostly sat unseen, tucked away in a family's memories. It wasn't until Yamal himself became a rising star that it resurfaced publicly, and by then, the coincidence felt almost too neat for reality. The greatest player of his generation had once held, as an infant, the player many now believe will help define the next one. Neither of them had any idea in that room of what was coming. Barcelona's scouting network picked up on Yamal at an almost unbelievable age. By some accounts, he was first noticed around 6 years old. Officially, he joined Barcelona's famed youth academy, La Masia, in 2014 at age 7. The same academy that had already produced Messi, Xavi Hernandez, Andres Iniesta, and generations of the club's greatest players. He didn't move into the academy's residence right away. For years, he kept training with one of the most prestigious youth systems on the planet, while still going home every night to that same working-class neighborhood, that same family, that same financial reality. And inside La Masia, something started happening that even experienced coaches struggled to explain. Yamal didn't just keep pace with kids his own age, he raced past them, constantly bumped up to train and play with players 2 or 3 years older. Instead of getting exposed by the size and physicality gap, he thrived on it. By September 2022, while still too young to even sign a professional contract, he was pulled up to train with Barcelona's senior squad at the personal request of then head coach Xavi Hernandez, a legend of the club, himself a product of La Masia, essentially saying that the gap in readiness simply wasn't there anymore. On April 29, 2023, at 15 years, 9 months, and 16 days old, Lamine Yamal made his first team debut for FC Barcelona in a 4-0 win over Real Betis. With that single appearance, he broke a club record that had stood since 1922, becoming the youngest player in Barcelona's history to ever wear the first-team shirt. Weeks later, he celebrated his first league title as Barcelona beat Espanyol to clinch the championship. A teenager who had been training with the first team for only a matter of months now had a winner's medal. Then, that October, playing against Granada, at 16 years and 87 days old, he became the youngest goalscorer in La Liga history. He went on to become the youngest player ever to start a Champions League match and the youngest ever to appear in a Clásico against Real Madrid. Spain's national team wasn't about to let a talent like this slip away either, even though Yamal was eligible to represent Morocco through his father or Equatorial Guinea through his mother. He chose Spain, the country of his birth. On September 8, 2023, at 16 years and 57 days old, he made his senior international debut in a 7-1 win over Georgia, coming off the bench and scoring in the same match. In one night, he became both the youngest player and the youngest goalscorer in the history of the Spanish national team. He was, by every legal definition, still a child, and he was already rewriting more than 100 years of football history. By the summer of 2024, Yamal was 16 years old, and Spain's coach Luis de la Fuente didn't just bring him to the European Championship as a squad player, he started him, a 16-year-old, in the biggest tournament in European football against grown men who had spent a decade in the sport. Nobody expected much from Spain going in. Their golden generation from 2010 was long retired, and the country hadn't won a major trophy in years. And then Yamal made his tournament debut against Croatia and immediately became the youngest player to ever appear at a European Championship, setting up a goal in the process. By the time Spain reached the semi-final, he had racked up 3 assists, tied for the most in the tournament. That semi-final, against France, is where the story turns into something else entirely. In the build-up, French midfielder Adrien Rabiot was asked directly whether the moment might be too big for a 16-year-old. His answer, in essence, was that it would be up to France to put pressure on Yamal and knock him out of his comfort zone, because reaching a final would require more than he had shown so far. Yamal saw the comments. The night before the match, he posted a short message on his Instagram story. "Move in silence. Only speak when it's time to say checkmate." France scored first. For a moment, it looked like the doubters might be proven right. Then, in the 21st minute, Yamal picked up the ball around 25 yards out, cut inside onto his favored left foot right past Rabiot, and curled a shot that bent in off the far post. At 16 years and 362 days old, it made him the youngest goalscorer in the history of the Men's European Championship. Spain went on to win 2-1, and after the final whistle, Yamal looked straight into a television camera and said 2 words: "Speak now." The next day, he posted a photo of the celebration on Instagram with a single caption, "Checkmate." Gary Lineker, watching from the BBC, later called him the best 16-year-old he had ever seen, saying he was better at that age than Pelé, Diego Maradona, or Lionel Messi had been. 4 days later, Yamal turned 17. On July 14, 2024, one day after his birthday, he walked out at Berlin's Olympic Stadium for the Euro 2024 final against England, the youngest player in history to appear in a European Championship final. Early in the second half, he cut in from the right, danced past a defender, and rolled a pass across the box for Nico Williams to finish. Spain led 1-0. England equalized through substitute Cole Palmer, but in the 86th minute, Mikel Oyarzabal scored the winner, and Spain held on to win 2-1. Spain were European champions for a 4th time, and for the first time in over a decade. Yamal was named Young Player of the tournament, and plenty of pundits argued he deserved consideration for the tournament's Best Player award entirely, a genuinely rare conversation for someone his age. In the middle of the celebration, cameras and fireworks everywhere, Yamal raised his hands and formed a number with his fingers. 3-0-4. Not first and foremost for the cameras, for Rocafonda, for the neighborhood that raised him a long way in every sense from the biggest stage in his sport. Winning a European Championship at 17 changes a life instantly and permanently. Sponsorship deals arrived. His face went on magazine covers. Barcelona handed him a long-term contract tied to the number 10 shirt, the number Messi once wore, and it quickly became one of the best-selling jerseys in the sport. But fame also meant his personal life stopped being private, sometimes in painful ways. In August 2024, his father, Munir, was the victim of a serious attack in a car park in Rocafonda, stabbed multiple times during an altercation that left him with what doctors described as life-threatening wounds. He was rushed to hospital and, after several tense days, made a full recovery, later returning to support his son from the stands. Yamal's personal relationships also became public property in a way most teenagers never have to deal with. A widely reported relationship with Argentine singer Nicki Nicole in 2025 became a constant tabloid subject before the two separated later that year, with Yamal addressing the speculation directly in interviews rather than letting rumors spiral unanswered. Through nearly all of it, his public responses stayed remarkably consistent, brief, direct, and unbothered. Asked repeatedly about the pressure of being compared to Messi from the moment he debuted, his answer has essentially never changed. He doesn't compare himself to anyone. He just plays. He has also been candid about where his sense of perspective actually comes from. In one interview, he explained it simply. His mother gave birth to him at 16, and his father had to go out and find whatever income he could just to bring food home. That, in his words, is real pressure. Everything he deals with now, by comparison, is a privilege. One more piece of this story matters to Yamal as much as any trophy. His Muslim faith, inherited through his father's side, and nurtured especially by his grandmother Fatima, who raised him partly in a household rooted in Islamic tradition and taught him the prayer he still recites before matches. He has fasted during Ramadan while competing at the highest level of professional football with both Barcelona and the Spanish national team, adjusting schedules and meal plans to support him. In the spring of 2026, that part of his identity became a matter of public controversy. During a Spain-Egypt friendly at Barcelona's RSDE Stadium, sections of the crowd were caught chanting an Islamophobic taunt aimed at the opposing team. Yamal, visibly affected, addressed it directly on Instagram afterward, writing that even though the chant wasn't personally aimed at him, using someone's religion as mockery on a football pitch reflects poorly on the people doing the chanting, not on him. Spain's Football Federation, the government, and players across European football, including Real Madrid's Vinicius Jr., publicly backed him, and Spanish police opened a formal investigation into the incident. For a teenager under that much scrutiny, speaking out publicly like that is not a small thing to do. By the 2025-26 season, Yamal wasn't a breakout prospect anymore. He was one of the most closely watched footballers on the planet, and he delivered, helping Barcelona win the La Liga title and the Supercopa de España while producing well over 20 goals and assists combined across the campaign. Then came the 2026 World Cup, hosted across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Spain arrived as one of the tournament's form teams, conceding almost nothing on their way through the knockout rounds, and Yamal, now 19, was central to it all. The final, against Lionel Messi's Argentina, was tense and tight for nearly the entire match, the first goalless World Cup final at 90 minutes since 1994. Argentina played the closing stretch of normal time and all of extra time down a man after midfielder Enzo Fernandez was sent off. Late in normal time, Yamal himself stepped up to a free kick that curled toward the corner, only for Argentina's goalkeeper Emiliano Martinez to somehow tip it away. The match went to extra time still scoreless. Finally, in the 106th minute, substitute Ferran Torres pounced on a ball headed into the box by fellow substitute Nico Williams and drove it past Martinez. It was the only goal of the match. Spain won the 2026 World Cup 1-0, their second title in history and their first since 2010, the year Yamal turned 3 years old, back in an apartment in Mataró, where, as he once put it, the kitchen and the bedroom were the same place. He was 3 years old the last time Spain won it. He was 17 when he became champion of Europe. He was 19 when he helped his country do it again, on American soil, standing on the same field as the very player who once held him as a baby.